What happens when the man who shattered your world is forced to witness your rise from the ashes? Ava's husband Mark ended their 10-year marriage with 6 soul-crushing words: "You will never be enough." He left her with nothing but the echo of his cruelty, and a future that felt like a barren wasteland. For 2 years, she vanished, swallowed by the obscurity he had destined for her. But one glittering evening at the city's most exclusive charity ball, a midnight blue Bugatti Chiron purrs to a stop. The door opens, and as Ava steps out, draped in diamonds and couture, Mark freezes. The woman he discarded has returned, but not as the wife he knew. She's on the arm of a billionaire, and her eyes hold a power he never imagined. This is the story of how a broken woman rebuilt herself into an unbreakable force, and the night her past finally collided with her magnificent present. The silence in their minimalist, gray-toned penthouse was the loudest sound Ava had ever heard. It was a cavernous, echoing void that had over the past year been filled only by strained pleasantries and the clinking of cutlery on plates during dinners where neither of them truly tasted the food. Tonight the silence was different. It was final. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the glittering skyline of Chicago. He hadn't looked at her, not really, for the past hour. He had simply delivered his verdict as clinical and detached as a surgeon announcing a terminal diagnosis. "It's just not working, Ava. It hasn't been for a long time." Ava sat on the edge of their custom-designed Italian leather sofa, the one she'd spent weeks picking out. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She had dedicated 10 years of her life to this man, to this life. She had been the perfect corporate wife. She'd given up her own budding career in architecture, a field she'd once been passionate about, to support his meteoric rise at the investment firm Sterling and Royce. She hosted his dinners, charmed his clients, remembered the names of their children, and managed their life with the precision of a CEO. She had made his world run so he could conquer it. "What do you mean, not working?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "We can go to therapy. We can try." He finally turned, and the look on his face was one of bored impatience. Mark was handsome in a conventional, polished way: sharp suit, expensive watch, a haircut that cost more than her weekly groceries. But his eyes, once warm and ambitious, now held a cold, dismissive glint. "Try what, Ava? To pretend we're something we're not. I've evolved. My life is moving in a certain direction, and you're static." The word hit her like a physical blow. Static. She who ran on a perpetual motion machine of his needs was static. "I gave up my career for you," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I built this home. I built us." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You decorated a house, Ava. I paid for it. You planned parties. I closed the deals that made them necessary. Don't confuse your role. You were a support system, a good one for a time. But I need more now. I need a partner who challenges me, who has her own fire, her own world." Every word was a carefully chosen dart aimed at the insecurities he himself had cultivated over the years. He'd told her she was too emotional to handle the cutthroat world of architecture, that her talents were better suited for creating a sanctuary for him. He had gently, systematically pruned her ambitions until only her devotion to him remained. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and treacherous. She refused to let them fall. "So that's it. 10 years, and you throw it away because you're bored." He walked over to the bar and poured himself a glass of Macallan 25, his movements fluid and unbothered. He took a sip, savoring it before delivering the final fatal blow. "It's not about boredom. It's about potential." He swirled the amber liquid, looking into the glass as if it held all the answers. "I'm on a trajectory to become a partner at the firm. The people I'm surrounded by, the women, they're dynamos. Artists, entrepreneurs, lawyers. They have substance." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, a cold, clinical appraisal. And then came the words that would be seared into her memory forever. "And you, Ava," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. You will never be enough. The finality of it shattered the last of her composure. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a judgment, a life sentence. He wasn't just leaving her, he was defining her. Insufficient, lacking, a placeholder who had outlived her usefulness. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love and trust was ironclad. He kept the penthouse, the cars, the art collection. She was given a modest one-time settlement, just enough to be insulting a severance package for a decade of service. Her lawyer, a man Mark's firm kept on retainer, had advised her it was the best she could hope for. Packing her life into cardboard boxes was a surreal experience. Each object told a story of a life that was no longer hers. The photo albums filled with smiling younger versions of themselves felt like fiction. As she was taping up the last box, Mark walked in with his new girlfriend, a sleek blonde art gallery owner named Tiffany, who eyed Ava with a mixture of pity and triumph. "I hope you'll be out by 5, darling," Tiffany said, her voice like honey laced with poison. "The decorators are coming tomorrow." Mark didn't even look at her. He just stood there checking his phone as if Ava were a ghost already haunting a home that had moved on without her. That was the last time she saw him. She walked out of the gleaming lobby of the building, her boxes loaded into a friend's car, and didn't look back because there was nothing left to see. 2 years later, Ava's world had shrunk to the size of a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that smelled perpetually of damp concrete and street food. The vibrant, confident woman who hosted glittering dinner parties was gone, replaced by a ghost who haunted the periphery of life. The settlement money had dwindled faster than she'd anticipated, eaten away by rent bills and the crushing weight of starting over from scratch at 34. Her days were a monotonous blur. She worked 2 jobs. From 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, she was a barista at a bustling downtown coffee shop, the daily grind. Her hands raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals. In the evening, she worked for a high-end catering company, Exquisite Events, where she served champagne and canapes to the very people she used to entertain. It was a cruel, twisted form of purgatory. She'd often see faces she recognized from her old life. Mark's colleagues, their wives, people who would look right through her, their eyes glazing over the uniformed help. She was invisible, a functional object in the backdrop of their fabulous lives. On the rare occasion someone did recognize her, they'd offer a pitying smile, or an awkward, hurried greeting before turning away as if her failure were contagious. Her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who had never trusted Mark, was her only lifeline. "You need to get out of this," Ava Chloe would say during their weekly cheap wine and takeout nights. "You have a degree from Columbia in architecture, for God's sake. You were at the top of your class. Why are you letting his voice still live in your head?" "Because he was right," Ava would whisper, tracing patterns on a sweaty wine glass. "I'm static. I haven't designed a thing in a decade. The software has changed. The industry has changed. Who would hire a 34-year-old relic?" Mark's words. "You'll never be enough" had become her mantra, a self-fulfilling prophecy. She had applied for a few junior drafting positions, but her resume had a 10-year black hole in the middle of it. The polite rejection emails stung each one a fresh confirmation of her own inadequacy. One cold October evening, Ava was working a charity gala at the Chicago Museum of Modern Art. The event was for a children's hospital, a cause she knew was important, but the opulence felt suffocating. Women in designer gowns dripped with jewels, and men in tailored tuxedos laughed loudly, their voices echoing in the cavernous white-walled gallery. Ava moved through the crowd with a tray of miniature crab cakes, her face a neutral mask, her feet aching in the cheap but mandatory black heels. She was clearing empty glasses near a large abstract sculpture when she overheard a conversation between 2 men. One was the museum's curator. The other was a man she didn't recognize, but he commanded the space around him with an effortless, quiet intensity. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to analyze everything they saw. "The design for the new wing is problematic," the curator was saying, wringing his hands. The architect is a genius, but he's all vision and no practicality. The City Planning Commission is citing issues with the load-bearing calculations for the suspended walkway. They say it's an engineering nightmare. The intense man nodded slowly. And his solution, he's refusing to compromise the aesthetic. He says the city's engineers lack imagination. Ava froze. The blueprints for the new wing had been featured in architectural journals for months. She had studied them online during one of her rare masochistic dives back into the world she'd lost. She knew the design. She'd seen the flaw herself, a breathtakingly beautiful concept that ignored the fundamental laws of physics. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she thought was long dead, she set her tray down on a nearby ledge. She grabbed a cocktail napkin and pulled a pen from her apron pocket. Her hand, usually trembling with exhaustion, was steady. In a few swift strokes, she sketched a modification to the walkway's support structure, a redistribution of the tension points using a cantilevered truss system disguised within the aesthetic of the original design. It was a simple, elegant solution that preserved the architect's vision while satisfying the engineering requirements. She stared at the drawing on the flimsy paper. For the first time in 2 years, she felt a spark, a flicker of the woman she used to be. A deep voice cut through her reverie. "May I see that?" She looked up, startled. The intense man was looking directly at her, his gaze fixed on the napkin in her hand, her face flushed with embarrassment. She was just a waitress doodling on a napkin. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just—" She stammered, crumbling the napkin in her hand. "Don't," he said, his voice calm but firm. He gently took the balled-up napkin from her fist and smoothed it out. He studied the sketch for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The museum curator peered over his shoulder, his eyes widening. "My word," the curator breathed. That could actually work." The man looked from the napkin to Ava. He wasn't looking at her uniform or her tray of half-eaten appetizers. He was looking at her, his eyes sharp and inquisitive. "Who are you?" he asked. Her name was on the tip of her tongue, but her identity felt fractured. Was she Ava Sterling, the discarded wife, or Ava the barista? Before she could answer, her supervisor hissed her name from across the room, gesturing angrily at her abandoned tray. "I have to go," she said, her cheeks burning. She turned and fled, disappearing back into the anonymous sea of servers, leaving the man holding her crumpled napkin sketch. She didn't see him watch her go, a look of profound intrigue on his face. He turned to the curator. "Find out who she is," he said, his voice low but absolute. "I want to meet her." The man was Julian Thorne, the reclusive, self-made billionaire owner of Thorne Industries, a global titan in tech and real estate development, and he was the primary benefactor of the new museum wing. 3 days passed. The napkin incident felt like a bizarre dream, a fleeting moment of madness. Ava was back to the relentless rhythm of her life, the hiss of the espresso machine, the weight of trays, the ache in her feet. The spark she had felt was extinguished, buried again under the suffocating blanket of her reality. She convinced herself the man had probably laughed at her sketch after she left a ridiculous doodle from a waitress playing architect. She was in the middle of a grueling lunch rush at the Daily Grind, shouting an order for a double-shot no-foam latte, when a woman in a razor-sharp business suit walked in. The woman bypassed the long queue and approached the counter, her eyes scanning the employees until they landed on Ava. "Are you Ava Sterling?" the woman asked, her voice crisp and professional. Ava's heart lurched. Yes," she said, wiping her sweaty hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" "My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm the chief of staff for Julian Thorne." She slid a heavy cream-colored business card across the counter. "Mr. Thorne would like to meet with you. Today, if possible. His car is waiting outside." The coffee shop seemed to fade into a dull roar around Ava. Julian Thorne, the name from the business magazines, the man from the gala. He had found her. Panic and a wild, terrifying hope warred within her. Meet with me. Why he was impressed by your structural analysis at the museum gala. Ms. Vance said, her expression unchanging. He believes you may be of value to a current project. 30 minutes later, Ava was sitting in the back of a black Maybach, its silent leather and wood interior a world away from the city bus she usually took. She was still in her coffee-stained uniform, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. She felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Thorne Industries was housed in a sleek, imposing skyscraper of black glass and steel that pierced the Chicago clouds, a building Ava had ironically studied in her college days as a marvel of modern architecture. She was whisked up a private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened into a sprawling minimalist office with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. And there, standing by the window, just as Mark had been on that final night, was Julian Thorne. But where Mark's presence had been about projecting power, Julian's was one of quiet, solid confidence. He turned as she entered, and his intense eyes met hers. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice as calm and deep as she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please call me Ava," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. She felt deeply self-conscious of her uniform, the faint smell of coffee that clung to her. He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Eleanor." "Thank you, Miss." Vance gave a slight nod and exited, closing the heavy doors behind her. "Mr. Thorne," Ava began. "I don't understand. The drawing on the napkin was just me being foolish. I shouldn't have—" "Foolish," he interrupted, a faint smile touching his lips. He picked up the napkin from his vast, uncluttered desk. It was now pressed flat under a piece of glass like a preserved specimen. "My lead engineers, a team from MIT and Caltech, have been trying to solve that walkway problem for 6 weeks. They came up with 3 solutions. All were cumbersome, expensive, and compromised the artistic integrity of the design. Your solution," he said, tapping the glass, "was better than all of them. It was elegant, efficient, and brilliant." Ava stared at him, speechless. The praise felt foreign, like a language she hadn't heard in a decade. "I looked into you, Ava," he continued, his tone shifting from appreciative to direct. "Columbia summa cum laude, the prestigious Hensler Prize for your thesis project. You were on track to be a star in your field. Then, nothing. For 10 years. He didn't need to say more. He knew. The shame washed over her again. "I got married," she said quietly. "My priorities changed." "They weren't changed. They were redirected," he corrected her gently. "Talent like yours doesn't just disappear. It gets buried. I'm not interested in your past, Ava. I'm interested in your potential." He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I have a project. A new sustainable urban development initiative. The Viridian Project, we're calling it. It's ambitious, a fusion of green technology and cutting-edge design. My architectural division is a team of sharks. They're brilliant, but they're competitive and ruthless. I'm not going to offer you a job." Ava's heart sank. Of course not. It was all a mistake. Instead, he said, "I'm going to offer you a chance. A 3-month probationary contract. A junior design consultant. You'll be assigned to the Viridian Project. You won't be given any special treatment. You'll be expected to keep up with the best in the business. If at the end of the 3 months you've proven your worth, we can discuss a permanent position. If you don't, we part ways, no hard feelings. I'll pay you a consultant's fee that will allow you to quit your other jobs and focus entirely on this." He named a figure that made Ava's head spin. It was more than she had been making in a year. It was everything she had ever wanted handed to her on a silver platter. And it terrified her. The ghost of Mark's voice echoed in her mind. "You're static. You'll never be enough." I haven't worked in this field for a decade," she said, her voice trembling. "The software, the regulations. I'm not qualified." "You are qualified," Julian said with unshakable certainty. "Your mind is qualified. The software can be learned. Regulations can be studied. The ability to see what you saw on that napkin, that cannot be taught. The question isn't whether you are qualified, Ava. The question is whether you are hungry enough to fight for it. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The choice is yours. My offer stands for 24 hours. Ava walked out of that building in a daze. The city streets seemed both alien and full of promise. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim the woman she had been. But it also meant facing the very world she had been convinced she wasn't good enough for. It meant risking failure on a scale she couldn't bear to imagine. That night she called Chloe, her voice thick with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Take it," Chloe said without a moment's hesitation. "Take it and burn the whole damn world down, Ava. This isn't about him. This is about you. What do you have to lose that you haven't already lost?" Chloe was right. She had already hit rock bottom. The only way left to go was up. The next morning, with a deep breath that felt like her first in years, Ava Sterling called Eleanor Vance and accepted the offer. Ava's first day at Thorne Industries was like being plunged into ice-cold water. The architectural division was on the 47th floor, a vast open-plan space buzzing with a palpable energy of ambition and stress. Young, sharp-dressed architects hunched over massive monitors, their faces illuminated by the glow of complex 3D modeling software. The air was thick with jargon and the smell of strong coffee. She was introduced by the division head, a stern man named Peterson, as a short-term consultant. The introduction was dismissive, and the team eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She was older than most of the junior designers, and her 10-year gap was an unspoken brand on her forehead. The learning curve was steeper than a cliff face. The software she had once known was now obsolete. AutoCAD had been replaced by Revit Rhino and a dozen other programs that felt like foreign languages. The first week was a brutal exercise in humility. She stayed late every night long after the office had emptied, working her way through online tutorials, her brain aching with the effort of absorbing a decade of innovation. Julian Thorne remained a distant, almost mythical figure. He didn't coddle her or check in. He had given her the opportunity. The rest was up to her. This hands-off approach was in its own way a vote of confidence. He wasn't a savior. He was an investor, and he was waiting to see a return on his investment in her talent. Her primary antagonist within the team was a hotshot designer named Carter, a smug and fiercely competitive man who saw Ava as a joke. He'd make passive-aggressive comments in meetings, helpfully explaining basic concepts to her, as if she were an intern, and conveniently forget to include her on important email chains. "Still trying to figure out how to draw a straight line, Sterling," he sneered one afternoon as she struggled with a rendering. The old Ava would have crumbled. She would have apologized and retreated into her shell. But something had shifted. Every condescending remark from Carter felt like a pale imitation of Mark's devastating judgment. She had survived the source of the poison. She could certainly handle the diluted venom. "I'm learning the software, Carter," she replied, her voice even not looking up from her screen. "But I already know how to design. Let me know when you learn the difference." The small team of designers within earshot went silent. Carter, stunned by the directness of her response, flushed and walked away without another word. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was the first time she had defended herself, her talent, in over a decade. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to find her footing. Her deep foundational knowledge of architectural theory was timeless. While others were wizards with the software, they often lacked a fundamental understanding of spacelight and human-centric design. Ava's ideas weren't the flashiest, but they were thoughtful, practical, and elegant. She poured all her energy into the Viridian project. She was assigned a small, seemingly insignificant part of the development, the design of the community green spaces and pedestrian flow between the residential and commercial towers. While others were clamoring to design the skyscraper facades, Ava immersed herself in the challenge. She remembered a quote from one of her old professors: "Any architect can build a monument. It takes a great architect to build a community." She worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove not just Julian but herself right. She spent weekends walking through different Chicago neighborhoods observing how people interacted with public spaces. She filled sketchbooks with ideas. Her design wasn't just about manicured lawns and benches. It was a dynamic, integrated system of rooftop gardens, vertical farms, rainwater collection systems, and plazas that encouraged social interaction. It was the heart of the project, designed to make the massive development feel human. 2 months into her contract, the project team was called for a major design review with Julian Thorne himself. Everyone was on edge. It was the first time he would be seeing the consolidated proposals. One by one, the lead architects presented their gleaming, futuristic tower designs. They were impressive but cold. When it was Ava's turn, Peterson introduced her section as the interstitial landscaping. She walked to the front of the boardroom, her heart pounding. She didn't have a flashy 3D fly-through. Instead, she had detailed, hand-drawn sketches alongside her computer models, showing the human element, children playing in a sensory garden, elderly couples walking along a shaded path, a bustling farmer's market in the central plaza. She spoke with a quiet passion she hadn't realized she possessed. "A building is just a structure," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "But the spaces between them are where life happens. The Viridian Project isn't just about sustainability in terms of energy consumption. It's about sustaining a community. It's about creating a place where people don't just live but thrive." When she finished, the room was silent. Carter looked ready to scoff. Peterson was impassive. Ava's stomach dropped, convinced she had failed, that her ideas were too soft, too idealistic for this cutthroat environment. Then Julian, who had been listening intently from the head of the table, spoke. "This," he said, gesturing towards Ava's presentation, "is the soul of the project. The towers are just beautiful, expensive containers. This is the vision." He looked directly at Ava, and for the first time she saw undisguised admiration in his eyes. "Give Ms. Sterling lead oversight on all public space integration. Her design philosophy will be the guiding principle for how the entire development connects." The shock in the room was electric. She had been leapfrogged from a probationary consultant to a lead position on the company's flagship project. Carter's jaw was practically on the floor. That evening, as Ava packed up her desk, Julian appeared at her cubicle. "I knew you had it in you," he said simply. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne, for the opportunity." "Call me Julian," he said. "And the opportunity was just a door. You're the one who walked through it and built a whole new room." A warmth spread through her chest, entirely different from the anxious need for approval she had felt with Mark. This was respect. It was acknowledgement earned through merit. As she rode the elevator down, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back was different. Her eyes were brighter. Her posture was taller. The ghost of the broken wife was fading, and an architect was beginning to emerge in her place. The promotion changed everything. Ava was no longer an outsider. She was a leader. She was given a small team, a proper office with a view and a seat at the main table in every important meeting. The initial resentment from colleagues like Carter slowly morphed into a grudging respect as they saw the dedication and brilliance she brought to the project. She wasn't just fixing problems. She was anticipating them, her designs weaving together the disparate elements of the massive development into a cohesive, beautiful whole. Her life outside of work began to transform as well. With a steady, substantial income, she moved out of her cramped apartment and into a bright, airy loft in a converted warehouse district. It was a blank canvas, and she filled it not with the cold, minimalist aesthetic Mark had demanded, but with warmth and character, reclaimed wood shelves overflowing with books on art and architecture, and pots of thriving plants. For the first time in years, she had a home that felt like her own. She reconnected with old friends from college, people she had drifted away from during her marriage. They were thrilled to see the old Ava back, the passionate, creative woman they had known. The shame that had kept her in hiding was gone, replaced by a quiet, growing confidence. Her relationship with Julian evolved as well. It remained professional, but a deep underlying current of mutual respect and friendship began to form. They would often have late-night brainstorming sessions over blueprints, their conversations flowing easily from architectural theory to philosophy to their shared passion for creating things that lasted. Ava learned more about him. Julian Thorne wasn't from old money. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood, his brilliance earning him a scholarship to Stanford, where he'd started his first tech company from his dorm room. He had a profound appreciation for anyone who built themselves up through sheer will and talent. He saw a kindred spirit in Ava. "You know," he said one evening as they shared takeout Chinese food in a conference room surrounded by renderings of the Viridian Project, the word Viridian comes from viridis, the Latin word for green, for flourishing, for vigor. "I know," Ava smiled. "It's fitting." "I chose it for the project," he said, looking at her, "but it seems to be fitting for you too." The compliment was simple, but it resonated deeply. With Mark, praise had always felt transactional, a reward for good behavior. With Julian, it was a statement of fact, an observation. The first phase of the Viridian Project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, largely due to Ava's efficient and innovative designs for the connecting infrastructure. The City Planning Commission, which had been skeptical, lauded the project as a new benchmark in urban development. The buzz in the architectural world was immense. An article in the prestigious journal Architectural Digest featured the project, specifically highlighting the visionary, human-centric approach of its lead integration designer, Ava Sterling. Reading her name in print praised for her mind and her work was an experience Ava could barely process. She had sent a copy to her parents, who had been so worried about her after the divorce. Her father, a retired engineer, had called her, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I always knew you had it in you." It was a validation that healed a part of her she thought was gone forever. One Friday afternoon, Julian called her into his office. "There's a charity ball next month," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes watching her closely. "The annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. Thorne Industries is the main sponsor. I'm expected to attend, and I would be honored if you would accompany me." Ava's breath hitched. The very same gala where her life had changed 2 years ago. The thought of returning not as an invisible waitress but as an honored guest on the arm of the event's sponsor was a dizzying prospect. I don't know," she hesitated. The old fears, the old insecurities flickered within her. It was the world Mark still inhabited. What if she saw him? Julian seemed to read her mind. "You are no longer the woman who left that event," he said gently. "You are one of the most respected rising architects in this city. It's time you took your place in it, as my partner for the evening." He had stressed the word partner, and she knew he meant it in every sense: a respected colleague, a valued friend. There was a warmth in his gaze that hinted at the possibility of more, but it was patient, undemanding. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his face, and she thought of the woman she was becoming. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was flourishing. She was Viridian. "I'd love to," she said, a genuine, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "I'd be honored." The week leading up to the gala was a whirlwind. Julian's assistant Eleanor arranged for a personal shopper to meet Ava. She spent an afternoon in a private suite at Saks Fifth Avenue trying on designer gowns. The experience was surreal. Years ago, she would have been picking a dress to please Mark, something that fit his image of the perfect wife, elegant but understated, beautiful but not attention-seeking. This time, the choice was entirely her own. She bypassed the safe, classic options and found herself drawn to a breathtaking gown by Marchesa. It was the color of a midnight sky, a deep shimmering blue that was almost black. It was exquisitely tailored, with a daring but elegant neckline and a cascade of delicate beadwork that sparkled like a constellation. When she put it on, she didn't see a divorced woman or a former waitress. She saw Ava Sterling, architect. Powerful, confident, whole. The night of the gala arrived, a crisp, clear evening. A sleek midnight blue Bugatti Chiron, a car that was less a vehicle and more a work of art, purred at the curb outside her loft. When she walked out of her building, the driver held the door, and she saw Julian waiting inside, He was in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, but his eyes were only on her. He audibly caught his breath. "Ava," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You are stunning." "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Thorne," she replied, a playful confidence in her tone that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The drive to the Museum of Modern Art was smooth and quiet. The same museum, the same event. But she was entering through a completely different door. As they pulled up to the red carpet, flashes from photographers erupted like fireworks. The press knew Julian Thorne, but they didn't know the magnificent woman with him. Whispers and murmurs followed them as they stepped out of the car. "Who is she? Is that his new girlfriend? She's gorgeous." Ava felt a flicker of nervousness, but Julian's hand was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. "Just breathe," he whispered in her ear, his voice a comforting rumble. "You belong here." And as they walked into the grand hall, she knew he was right. The room was filled with the city's elite, the titans of finance, politics, and culture. She saw faces she had once served champagne to. Tonight they were the ones looking at her with curiosity and admiration. The museum's director rushed to greet them. "Julian, so glad you could make it. And you must be the brilliant Ava Sterling. I've been reading about your work on the Viridian Project. It's revolutionary." Ava smiled and shook his hand, her confidence solidifying with each introduction. She wasn't Julian Thorne's date. She was Ava Sterling. She was here in her own right. They circulated through the room, Julian proudly introducing her to his contacts, not as his companion, but as his star architect. She was so engrossed in a conversation with a renowned urban planner that she didn't notice them at first. But a shift in the energy of the room, a subtle turning of heads, made her glance towards the main entrance. And there he was. Mark Sterling, looking exactly the same, if a little more strained around the eyes. On his arm was Tiffany, draped in a garish gold dress, looking bored and scanning the crowd for someone more important to talk to. Mark was in his element, schmoozing, shaking hands, putting on the performative charm that had once captivated Ava. His firm, Sterling & Royce, was a minor sponsor of the event, and he was clearly working the room for clients. Ava's heart gave a single hard thud against her ribs, an echo of an old fear. But then it steadied. The terror she had anticipated wasn't there. In its place was a strange clinical detachment. She was looking at a man she used to know, a chapter from a book she had long since finished reading. Julian, ever perceptive, noticed her gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She turned to him and gave him a small, genuine smile. "I'm perfect," she said, and she meant it. Mark hadn't seen her yet. He was laughing too loudly at some joke, his back to them. And in that moment Ava knew the confrontation she had dreaded for 2 years was not something to be feared. It was simply an event that was about to happen, and she was ready for it. The stage was set. The players were in place. The past was about to collide with the present. Mark was holding a glass of champagne, deep in a conversation with a potential client, a real estate mogul he'd been trying to land for months. He was laying the charm on thick, gesturing expansively with one hand. Tiffany was plastered to his side, occasionally offering a vapid smile. "And so the projected returns are not just stable. They're exponential," Mark was saying, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "Our portfolio is unmatched in the city." The mogul, a shrewd older man named Mr. Harrington, nodded politely, though his eyes were beginning to wander. They scanned the room and then suddenly widened, fixing on something over Mark's shoulder. "My God," Harrington murmured, his attention completely captured. "That's Julian Thorne. I didn't know he was coming tonight. And who is that with him?" Mark, irritated at losing his audience, turned to see what had so thoroughly stolen the spotlight. He followed Harrington's gaze across the crowded ballroom. He saw the cluster of people, the subtle deference being paid. He saw the unmistakable figure of Julian Thorne, a man whose net worth was 1,000 times his own. And then he saw the woman on Thorne's arm. For a moment his brain refused to process the information. He saw a tall, elegant woman in a stunning midnight blue gown. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and a delicate diamond necklace, the famous Orion's Tear from the jeweler Harry Winston, he'd later realize with a sickening jolt, rested at her throat. She was laughing at something Thorne had said, her entire being radiating a light of confidence and joy he had never seen before. And then she turned her head slightly. The light caught her face. It was Ava. The champagne glass in Mark's hand tilted, spilling cold liquid over his fingers. He didn't notice. A profound system-shocking freeze took hold of him. It started in his chest and spread through his limbs, rooting him to the spot. His mouth went dry. His carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be Ava. His Ava was static. His Ava worked in a coffee shop. His Ava was the woman he had discarded because she wasn't enough, couldn't keep up, had no ambition. The woman across the room looked like she owned the world. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly, impossibly out of his league. Mark. "Are you listening?" Mr. Harrington asked, annoyed. Mark couldn't answer. His mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. Ava. With Julian Thorne. The reclusive tech billionaire. How, when? Why? A hot, ugly wave of possessiveness and disbelief washed over him. That was his ex-wife, the woman he had deemed worthless. And she was standing beside the most powerful man in the city. Tiffany, noticing his frozen state, followed his gaze. "Who's that?" she asked, a note of jealousy in her voice. "Her dress is divine." When Mark didn't answer, she nudged him. "Mark, what is it that's Ava?" He finally managed to choke out the name, tasting like acid. Tiffany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "You're Ava, the sad little mouse." "Ava? No way." Ignoring her, propelled by an instinct he couldn't name, a toxic cocktail of jealousy, rage, and a desperate need to reassert his old dominance, Mark started moving towards them. He pushed through the crowd, his polite social mask crumbling to reveal the raw, bewildered anger beneath. Ava saw him coming. The smile on her face didn't falter. She subtly placed a hand on Julian's arm, a small gesture he immediately understood. He stopped talking and looked down at her, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a tiny, reassuring nod. "I've got this." Mark stopped a few feet away from them, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. "Ava," he said, his voice louder than he intended. Ava turned to him fully. She didn't flinch. She didn't look angry or hurt. She looked at him with a polite, slightly confused expression, as if trying to place a vaguely familiar face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cool and clear as a bell. "Have we met?" The words, delivered with such calm, devastating indifference, struck Mark harder than any scream or accusation ever could have. It was a complete and total dismissal. She had erased him. In that moment, he was not her ex-husband, the man who had defined her world for a decade. He was a stranger, a nobody. He gaped at her, utterly flabbergasted. "What, Ava, it's me?" "Mark." She tilted her head, a flicker of feigned recognition in her eyes. "Oh, Mark. Of course. It's been a long time. You look, well." The compliment was delivered with the same detached warmth one might offer a former building superintendent. Before he could form a response, Julian Thorne stepped forward slightly, his presence a solid wall of power beside Ava. He didn't glower or threaten. He simply extended a hand to Mark. "Julian Thorne," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "You must be the gentleman who was married to Ava before her career took precedence." The reframing was masterful. It wasn't that Mark had left her. It was that her brilliant career had simply moved beyond him. It completely rewrote their history in a single sentence. Mark's hand was still slick with champagne as he numbly shook Julian's. He felt small, insignificant, utterly outmaneuvered. He saw Mr. Harrington watching from across the room, his expression one of newfound fascination, not with Mark, but with Ava. In one disastrous move, Mark had not only failed to reassert his power, he had exposed his own insignificance. "Ava, we should go." Julian said, turning his full attention back to her, effectively dismissing Mark as if he were a piece of furniture. "I believe Mr. Getty from the museum board wants to discuss your ideas for the new sculpture garden." "Of course," Ava said, giving Mark one last polite and utterly final nod. As they turned and walked away, a part of the crowd parting for them, as if they were royalty, Mark was left standing alone, Tiffany looking at him with a new critical light in her eyes. He watched Ava's back, the shimmering blue dress, the confident stride, the easy way she laughed, with the most influential man in the room. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost a wife 2 years ago. He had lost a queen, and he had been too blind and too arrogant to ever even see her crown. The words he had thrown at her, "You'll never be enough," came echoing back, a bitter, mocking judgment on himself. He was the one who hadn't been enough for her. The rest of the evening passed in a blissful, empowering blur for Ava. The encounter with Mark, which she had once imagined would be a moment of painful reckoning, was instead a moment of quiet, absolute victory. Her power hadn't come from a vengeful, dramatic speech, but from her genuine indifference. Mark's opinion of her no longer held any weight. His validation was no longer the currency by which she measured her worth. She and Julian left the gala early. In the silent, cocoon-like interior of the Bugatti, he reached over and took her hand. "Are you really all right?" he asked, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "I am," she said, meeting his gaze, her eyes shining in the passing city lights. "For the first time in a very long time, I know exactly who I am, and it has nothing to do with him." The moment felt charged, a culmination of months of friendship and mutual admiration. He leaned in and she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened, a kiss of respect, of partnership, of a shared future built not on need, but on choice. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where the prince saves the damsel. It was a partnership of equals, two people who had built their own empires meeting in the middle. In the weeks that followed the story of Julian Thorne's brilliant and beautiful new partner, the architect Ava Sterling became the talk of the town. The gossip columns were alight with speculation, but the business journals were focused on something more concrete, her undeniable talent. Thorne Industries officially announced that Ava would be made a full partner in their new architectural subsidiary, Thorne Sterling Design, which would be spearheading innovative and sustainable urban projects globally. Mark's life, in contrast, began a slow, quiet implosion. Mr. Harrington, the real estate mogul, had pulled his potential investment the day after the gala, choosing instead to approach Thorne Sterling Design for a consultation. Word travels fast in their elite circles. The story of Mark's public dismissal by his ex-wife, now a rising star on the arm of a titan, painted him as a man with poor judgment. Clients became wary. His partners at the firm saw him as a liability. His trajectory, once a sharp upward climb, plateaued and then began to dip. Tiffany, seeing his social and financial capital diminish, left him for a hedge fund manager 6 months later. He was left alone in the cold, gray penthouse that was no longer a symbol of his success, but a monument to his greatest mistake. Ava, however, rarely thought of him. Her focus was on the future, on the blueprints spread across her desk, on the skylines she was about to change. Her relationship with Julian was a source of joy and stability, a partnership built on a foundation of intellectual respect and genuine affection. He celebrated her successes as if they were his own, and she challenged him to be a better, more thoughtful leader. About a year after the gala, Ava stood on a platform overlooking the sprawling construction site of the Viridian project. The framework of the towers reached for the sky, and the foundational layout of the community spaces she had designed was taking shape below. It was real. It was happening. She had built this. Julian came to stand beside her, handing her a hard hat. He didn't say a word, just followed her gaze. "I used to think my life was over," Ava said softly, speaking more to herself than to him. "I believed what he said, that I was nothing without him." "He didn't see you," Julian replied, his voice firm. A man who needs to diminish a woman to feel powerful is the weakest man of all. He was never in your league. She turned to look at him, a radiant, peaceful smile on her face. She was no longer defined by the man who left her, nor by the man who found her. She was defined by the steel and glass rising from the ground, by the green spaces that would one day be filled with life, by the quiet, unshakable knowledge in her own heart. She was Ava Sterling. And she was more than enough. Ava's story isn't just about revenge. It's about resurrection. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Mark's cruel words were meant to be a life sentence, but instead they became the fuel for her magnificent transformation. She didn't just find a new life. She built one brick by brick with the very talent her ex-husband tried to bury. Her victory wasn't just in the moment he saw her step out of that car. It was in every blueprint she drew, every project she led, and every morning she woke up knowing she was the sole architect of her own happiness. If Ava's journey from heartbreak to triumph inspired you, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of empowerment and sweet, sweet justice.